What's going on, YouTube? This is SG1 Sports, and you're watching our college football channel. It's time for the Week 5 College Football Playoff Eliminator, and we've got several new eliminations, the most eliminations that we've had, which makes sense because for most of these Power 5 teams, you've got to have 2 losses to be eliminated, and now we've had time for several teams to lose 2 games, and they're going to keep coming and coming and coming, and we're going to, of course, see this field narrow down to just a handful of teams in here in just a few weeks. It'll go by quickly. So let's get right to it. First of all, the teams that were already eliminated coming into this week. Every group of 5 team, every independent except for BYU. BYU, the one independent team, the one non-Power 5 team that still has a chance. I think it's a very small chance, but they do have a chance. And then you see the other teams, the Power 5 teams here that were already eliminated, most of them because they lost 2 games already. So let's get into the new eliminations this week. And look, we got a bunch of them. Arizona, Florida, Miami, Michigan State, Missouri, Stanford, Texas, Vanderbilt, Virginia, and Wisconsin. Now, some of these teams have a chance to be brought back from the dead, and that's kind of what we do. We pretty much just, if a team loses 2 games and they're pretty much out of it, I mean, there's a very, 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 very small chance that they could work their way back and maybe win their conference or whatever and get to the playoff. So I'm looking at Florida especially. Florida, if they win out, I think would probably be in. I don't think we can guarantee that they would be in, but they could still win the SEC potentially, depending on how things go with Tennessee. Of course, you'd need Tennessee to lose. Actually, it's going to be tough for Florida because you'd need Tennessee and Kentucky to lose 3 games. It's going to be tough for Florida, but my point with Florida is the fact that they've lost to 2 good teams. They've got to win over Utah. So if they were to somehow sneak into the SEC championship, it's not going to happen. But if they were able to, they'd have a chance. I think Texas, because of one of their losses coming to Alabama, perhaps if they were to win the Big 12, they could get into that conversation. Wisconsin's still alive in the Big 10, a chance to win the Big 10 championship. Although, based off of what we saw against Ohio State, I don't see any chance of them beating them in a conference championship game. But I'd say, yeah, for these teams, they're out of it, really. I don't see anything that's realistic for any of these teams to make it to the college football playoff. Even if Texas won out and won the Big 12, they probably would not get in with the 2 losses. But the way they've looked last week, it's hard to imagine them winning out anyway. So several more teams eliminated here after week 4. Teams that have 1 loss that we can't technically eliminate them, but they're probably not going to make it. The odds are very, very small, just because maybe who they've lost to, or just because these teams aren't that great. Arizona, Auburn, Cal, Duke, Illinois, Indiana, Iowa State. I've got Iowa State on there twice. Kansas State, North Carolina, Rutgers, Texas A&M, Texas Tech, and Washington State. And actually, Arizona was on the eliminated list, so that was just an error on my part. You see Arizona right there on the new eliminations, and then you see right here, they don't have 1 loss. They now have 2 losses after they just lost. So Arizona's out of it. Ignore that. I apologize. Auburn, they're not going to win out. Cal's not going to win out. Duke, Illinois, Indiana, Iowa State. Kansas State would be interesting, but they now have that loss to Tulane. That's going to be tough, even if they were to win the Big 12. I don't know if you can overcome that loss. North Carolina, they're not going to win out. Rutgers, Texas A&M maybe has the talent, but I just don't see it happening with their schedule. Texas Tech and Washington State. So I don't really see any of these teams, again, having a realistic shot at making the college football playoff. And then we move on to the teams that have 1 loss but are still alive. Maybe they're good enough to possibly somehow win out. It's unlikely, though, really, for most of these teams. I guess I'm looking at this list. I'm looking at Oklahoma and Oregon being teams that have a Utah. I mean, I guess, yeah, some of these teams will have a chance. Arkansas, it's going to be tough for them to win out. Baylor, if they win out, they would go undefeated in the Big 12. They definitely, I think, have a good chance to be in the playoff if they were to win out. BYU will have a chance if they win out. Iowa, it's going to be tough. I probably should have put them on the other page because they've got Michigan and I believe Ohio State as well on the schedule. LSU, going to be tough. Maryland, Mississippi State, getting through the SEC, of course, having to go through Alabama and everything. That's going to be tough. Same thing with LSU and Mississippi State there. Oklahoma, if they turn things around and they win out, they're probably going to have a good shot to get in there. And again, that's what I said. Oklahoma and Oregon. Oklahoma, Oregon, Utah, probably the most likely teams to make the playoff. with one loss, the teams that already have one loss. Oregon State played USC really tough, so if they were to win out, maybe get them in a rematch, you could see them maybe sneaking in there. Someone had them, I think, as a dark horse playoff team in the preseason. I don't remember who that was. Pittsburgh, with Miami losing, Pittsburgh, with Miami just looking bad, let's put it that way. Pittsburgh really looks like the best team in the Coastal right now, so perhaps they could win out and get to the ACC championship. Maybe if they take down Clemson, there is a path for them. Wake Forest is going to need some help because they're going to need Clemson to lose 2 games in order for them to get to the ACC championship. I don't see a Wake Forest, an 11-1 Wake Forest team getting in the playoff. I just don't see that happening. So these teams still alive. They're going to need to win out, and some of them will need some help. Some of them, if they win out, I think that they are pretty much in. And we'll kind of start to narrow that down. You're looking at like LSU, Mississippi State, maybe Oklahoma, maybe Oregon, maybe Utah. These teams, if they win out, I think would probably be in. But long ways to go. Long ways to go. So how about the teams that are still undefeated? We still got several undefeated teams. And because of my error earlier with Arizona, when I counted up these teams, it's possible that I left off a team or two. Because I'm trying to cover every Power 5 team should be somewhere on these graphics, either eliminated, a previous elimination, a new elimination, a one loss, or an undefeated team. So if I missed any of the Power 5 teams, please let me know and I'll try to correct that for next week. But we have Alabama, Clemson, Florida State, Georgia, Kansas is still on this list, Kentucky, Michigan, Minnesota still on this list, NC State, Ohio State, Oklahoma State, Ole Miss, Penn State, Syracuse, TCU, Tennessee, UCLA, USC, and Washington. So we're here. Most of these teams have played 4 games, like TCU's only played 3, but most of them have played 4. And when you look at these teams, who's the biggest surprise? Probably Kansas. I think Minnesota they didn't have a very tough start to their schedule, but the fact that they beat Michigan State the way they did, that's a little bit surprising. You see UCLA still on this list, but they've had a pretty easy. Syracuse, I'd say Syracuse is probably the second biggest surprise behind Kansas so far. They've played some quality teams. They played a couple of conference games already. They played Purdue, and they're undefeated. Very impressive. I know they barely won some of those games, but still very impressive. And then you've got your usual suspects with Alabama and Georgia on this list, Clemson. Florida State's a bit surprising because they beat LSU and went on the road to beat Louisville. So who is going to be the surprise team from this list come November? That's going to be the question. And I would say that at least one team on this list will still be a surprise team, will still be undefeated once we get to November. I don't know who it's going to be, but I think someone will stay on that undefeated list. Maybe even Kansas. Who knows? So you look at the updated playoff bracket picture here. Again, this is pretty much if all the favorites went out. You're going to have Georgia. You're going to have Ohio State. You're going to have Alabama. I think, again, the favorites went out. Alabama probably wins out in the regular season, but then loses to Georgia in the SEC championship. I don't know. Alabama's got some tough games on the road coming up, so I don't know if they can do that or not. But then your other team, so we've taken Oklahoma off of that 4 line. Now it seems like it's between Michigan, Clemson, and USC. I know USC barely won, but they did still win, and they are the favorites still in the Pac-12. So those are the teams right now that seem to be most likely for the 4 seed. I would probably say Clemson, just because of Notre Dame not looking as good, Miami not looking as good. If they can get past NC State, I don't really know who's going to beat them. It would take an upset, perhaps a Syracuse. I mean, you never know. But those are the 3 teams right now that I would say are the favorites for that 4 seed. Plenty of other teams, though, will have a chance, and many teams still control their own destiny. Of course, all those undefeated teams. If you're a Power 5 team and you go undefeated, you're going to make it in the college football playoff unless you have 5 Power 5 teams at the end of the year and they're all undefeated and they're all conference champions. That's really the only way you're not going to get in if you're undefeated, in my opinion. Maybe an undefeated Pac-12 team like a USC would not get in over Alabama if they lose a close game to Georgia. You know, there are definitely different scenarios where you can't say anything for sure right now, but I feel pretty good if Michigan, Clemson, USC, if they win out, even if Michigan loses to Ohio State, if it's a close game, they're still going to be in that conversation. So that's why I put them there at number 4. Of course, a tough test coming up on the road at Iowa. So that's the updated playoff picture, the updated eliminations. Give me your thoughts. What do you think about all this? Down in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more here on the SG1 Sports College Football Channel.